I walked into the courtroom, and the woman who abandoned me at 2 years old stood and called me a fraud. The judge struck his gavel. Today, we will look only at evidence. A sealed letter from my grandmother appeared, but their lawyer simply smiled. He had some mystery doctor. When my graduation photo flashed on screen, my family's seats were empty. And then came the bank statements. 20 years of steady payments, but to whose name? My name is Aurora Bennett. I am 33 years old, and for the most part, my life is quiet. I am a cardiologist at the Riverside Heart Institute, a place of steady rhythms and urgent repairs. My work is demanding, built on science and pressure, and I live in Ridgemorne, Pennsylvania, a town defined by old trees and sturdy brick houses. My own house, however, was never truly mine. It was hers. My grandmother, Margaret Whiteham, passed away 3 weeks ago. The silence in her house on Sycamore Avenue is an entity, a physical weight. It still smells of her, a faint, dry scent of paper from her library, lemon oil on the furniture, and the ghost of roses from the garden she tended with fierce academic precision. Margaret was a retired law professor, a woman whose mind was a steel trap encased in soft cashmere. Her will was exactly as she was, clear, concise, and absolute. I sat in a sterile conference room while her lawyer, a man she had known for 40 years, read the document. He didn't rush. He knew this was a final lecture from his old mentor. The house, her investments, her library, her personal effects, everything was left to me, her granddaughter, Aurora Bennett. It wasn't a surprise, it was a confirmation. I was her student, her gardener, her Sunday dinner companion, and in the end, her caregiver. I was the one who held her hand as she took her last quiet breath. The email arrived yesterday. It came not to my personal account, but to the professional one listed on the Institute's website, as if to remind me of my public standing. The sender was a law firm I had never heard of, Lang Associates. The subject line was Cold Hayes vs. Bennett, Estate of Margaret Whiteham. My blood slowed, thickened. Hayes. I opened it. The legal jargon was dense, but the accusation was brutally simple. My biological parents, Leah and Connor Hayes, were formally contesting the will. They were suing me. The grounds: undue influence on a person of diminished capacity. Diminished capacity. The words vibrated with a sickening absurdity. Margaret Whiteham, the woman who 2 months ago had engaged me in a 90-minute debate over the ethical ramifications of a new anticoagulant therapy. The woman who read Supreme Court opinions for pleasure. But it was the other phrase that struck me like a physical blow: undue influence. They were accusing me of manipulating her, of poisoning the mind of the only mother I had ever known. Leah and Connor Hayes were not my parents. They were my progenitors. The law, in its infinite, sterile wisdom, had a different name for what I was. I was a child abandoned at 2 years old. My parents had simply left, gone, vanished from my life, leaving me on the porch of my grandparents' home with a small suitcase and a note. My parents, my real parents, were Harold and Margaret Whiteham. They were the ones who patched my skinned knees, who sat in the front row of every terrible school play, who listened to my first clumsy attempts to describe the human heart. They were the ones who went to family court when I was 4 and legally adopted me. They made me their daughter, not just in their hearts, but on paper. They gave me their name, but I had already been given theirs. I was Aurora Bennett, and I was, in every way that mattered, a Whiteham. Leah and Connor were just stories. Cautionary tales whispered between other family members, until I was 7. I was playing on the floor of the study, just outside the kitchen, lining up wooden blocks into a long, winding wall. I was supposed to be napping, but the afternoon light was too bright. I heard Grandma Margaret's voice, her calm, measured tone on the telephone, and then another voice, a voice I didn't recognize, thin and sharp and whining. Leah, I just can't, Mom. He's too much right now. He's a burden. We don't have the money. They didn't even know who I was. A burden. I felt a sharp, precise pain in my chest, right under my sternum. It was the first time I remembered feeling it, a physical ache. She's not a he, Leah, Grandma Margaret said. Margaret's voice was suddenly ice. She's your daughter, and she's never a burden. You made your choice. Do not call here asking for money you will not use on her. There was a click, then the heavy sigh of the receiver being placed back in its cradle. I heard Margaret stand there for a full minute. I didn't move. I just stared at my wall of blocks, the word burden echoing in my head. That was the first cut. The first time I truly understood that I wasn't just their daughter, I was the one they had thrown away. The antidote to that poison was Sunday. Sundays were immutable, for as long as I could remember. Sunday was Margaret's day. Even through medical school and residency, I drove back to Ridgemorn. I would trade shifts, beg colleagues, drive through snowstorms. I never missed a Sunday. We had a routine in the spring and summer, we'd spend the afternoon in her garden. She taught me the names of every rose, Madam Caroline too, Peace, Mr. Lincoln. You have to be ruthless with roses, Aurora, she'd say, her gloved hands decisively pruning a cane. You cut away the dead wood so the new growth can flourish. Then we would go inside to the kitchen, the air thick with the promise of dinner. And for dessert, always the carrot cake, her recipe. It became our shared language. The smell of cinnamon, nutmeg, and warm cream cheese frosting was the smell of safety. It was the smell of unconditional, fiercely intellectual love. We would sit at the massive mahogany dining table, just the two of us, and we would talk. She'd ask about my cases, and I'd ask about her books. We debated politics, ethics, the newest film she'd watched. Those Sundays were the anchor of my life. Then, Grandpa Harold died. It was a massive coronary. I was in my final year of residency. I was in the emergency room when he was brought in. I saw his name on the chart, and my world simply stopped. I ran the code, my own hands, the hands I'd trained to save hearts, pressed down on his chest, trying to force life back into the man who had taught me how to ride a bicycle. It was futile. After the funeral, the house on Sycamore felt too big, too empty for her. My Sunday visits became weekend stays. I'd drive down Friday after my shift and leave before dawn on Monday. You were hovering, Aurora, she told me once, her eyes sharp over her reading glasses. I just like your coffee. I lied. Liar, she snorted. You just want my carrot cake. We both knew the truth. We were a fortress of two. About 10 years ago, on one of those quiet Saturday afternoons, she brought up the will. We were on the back porch shelling peas. Harold and I made a change to our wills, she said, her voice casual, her eyes fixed on the garden before he passed. We are leaving everything to you. I stopped, a pea pod held halfway to the bowl. Grandma, you can't. What about Leah? She looked at me then, her gaze unwavering. What about her? Leah made her choice 30 years ago. Connor made his. She snapped a pod with finality. This isn't about fairness, Aurora. Fairness is not some magic formula where everything is split equally regardless of effort or love. This house, this garden, this life, we built it. You and Harold and I. You stayed when others left. You were here. The assets are just things. They are tools, and they belong to the person who values the life they represent. That person is you. I looked at the email again. Leah and Connor Hayes. The names felt foreign in my mouth. This lawsuit. It wasn't a desperate plea for familial reconciliation. It wasn't about a long-lost daughter, or a deathbed regret. They hadn't called when Margaret was sick. They hadn't come to the funeral. They hadn't sent a single flower. This was about the house. This was about the stocks. This was about the portfolio Margaret and Harold had built over a half-century of disciplined work and quiet living. They wanted the prize for a race they hadn't even bothered to run. They saw a payday, and I was the only thing standing in their way. They were trying to paint me as a thief, a manipulator, to get their hands on the inheritance they had forfeited the moment they left a 2-year-old child on a porch. That night, I drove to the cemetery. The air was cold, sharp with the coming autumn. I stood before the 2 granite headstones, side by side, Harold Whiteham and Margaret Whiteham. Beloved, I placed my hand on the cold stone of her name. There were no tears, just a sudden, cold clarity that settled deep in my chest, right where my own heart beat its steady, rhythmic protest. They weren't just attacking me, they were attacking her memory. They were trying to invalidate her final, deliberate act of love. They were trying to rewrite her story to paint her as a feeble, confused old woman. I won't let them, I whispered to the silent stones. The words were a vow, heavy in the chilled air. I won't let them tarnish you. I will protect your choice, Grandma. I'll protect your legacy. I'll use the very laws you respected, the very logic you taught. They want a fight based on blood. I'll give them a fight based on facts. This wasn't about the money. This was about the truth, and I would protect it. I needed someone who saw this not as a family tragedy, but as a hostile takeover. Margaret Whiteham didn't suffer fools, and the lawyer who defended her memory couldn't either. I found Dana Morales. Her office, high up in a downtown skyscraper, was all glass, white marble, and brushed steel. It was the aesthetic opposite of my grandmother's warm, book-filled study. Dana herself was the same, tailored, sharp, and utterly devoid of sentiment. She wore a severe grey suit and a watch, no other jewelry. She didn't offer condolences. She pointed to a chair. They are alleging diminished capacity and undue influence, Dana said. Her voice was flat, holding no judgment, only facts. She clicked her pen. They are claiming you isolated your grandmother, preyed on her fragility, and coerced her into changing the will. My grandmother was a law professor at Windermere for 40 years, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. She was fragile in the way granite is fragile. That is an emotional truth, Dr. Bennett, Dana replied, not unkindly. In court, it is irrelevant. They do not have to prove she was clinically feeble. They just have to introduce enough doubt that she might have been. They will paint a picture of a lonely, confused old woman. Our job is to provide a mountain of contrary evidence so high that their claim looks petty and absurd. She didn't deal in emotion. She dealt in proof. She was a surgeon for legal diseases. She was perfect. Who am I facing? I asked. Victor Lang, she said the name and watched for my reaction. I had none. I'm a cardiologist. I don't follow the local legal theatre. She elaborated. Lang is drama. He's expensive, loud, and he loves to perform for a jury, even when there isn't one. He will use foul language. He will talk about the sanctity of blood and the sacred bond between a mother and her child. He will try to paint you as a cold, calculating opportunist who swooped in. He's representing Leah and Connor, I said. They must be paying him a fortune. Or, Dana countered, he's working on contingency. He's betting on a big payout. That means he thinks he can win. And the judge? Dana glanced at the file she'd already started. Judge Harper Lane. My blood went cold, then hot. Harper Lane, Windermere School of Law, class of '92. Dana looked up, her gaze suddenly sharp, assessing me. How do you know that? She was one of my grandmother's students, I said. Margaret. Grandma. She always said Lane was one of the brightest she ever taught. She called her relentlessly logical. Dana leaned back, tapping the pen against her stark white desk. That is a double-edged sword, Doctor. Judge Lane will either respect Margaret's intelligence enough to honor her explicit final wishes, or, to prove she is not biased by her old relationship, she will bend over backward to give Lang every possible opening. He will play on the latter. We will rely on the former. So, where do we start? I asked, the familiar feeling of prepping for a complex procedure settling over me. We start with the deceased's life, Dana said. They are attacking her mind, her autonomy. We will rebuild it for the court. We need the last 30 years of her life documented, diaries, journals, call logs, emails, calendars, photographs. We need her medical records, every checkup, every blood test, every prescription. We are going to establish a baseline of unimpeachable competence. My mind flew to the attic, to the heavy banker's boxes stacked neatly under the eaves. That night, I drove back to the house on Sycamore Avenue. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't the heavy silence of grief. It was the charged silence of an archive, waiting. I pulled down the folding stairs to the attic and climbed. The smell of cedar and old, dry paper enveloped me. There they were, 5 heavy-duty cardboard boxes labeled by year in my grandmother's precise, academic script. Her journals. I hadn't realized the extent of it. I thought she just wrote occasionally. This was not occasional, this was daily. For 35 years, identical, leather-bound, 5-year diaries. I sat on the dusty floor, and pulled the box marked 1995 to 2000. I was 10 in 1998. I found my birthday. Aurora turned 10 today. Bright, fiercely curious, asked for a microscope. Harold and I are so proud. I flipped the page to a date 2 weeks later. Call from Leia. Needs money for rent. Says she will try to visit Aurora for Christmas. I sent the money. I am not hopeful. My hands were shaking. I pulled the journal for that Christmas. Christmas Eve. Aurora waited by the window until 9 p.m. Leia never called, never showed. Harold was furious. I am weary. The greatest gift she ever gave us was the daughter she didn't want. I sat on that floor for hours, the dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from the attic window. I pulled another volume. 5 years later, my high school graduation. Leia promised. She promised Harold she would be there. The seat was empty. Aurora pretended not to notice. She has a strength she should never have had to learn. It was all there, a meticulous 30-year record of broken promises, empty chairs, and profound silence, all recorded in Margaret's clear, objective script. This wasn't a diary of emotions, it was a ledger of facts. This was the spine of our case. The next morning, Dana's office felt like a command center. I had the boxes wheeled in on a dolly. Good, she said, her eyes lighting up in a way I hadn't seen yet. This is the spine. Now, corroboration. Who saw you there every week? Who saw Margaret's life? Her neighbors, I said immediately. It's an old neighborhood. People notice names. Mr. Kellogg, directly across the street. He's lived there for 40 years. He's always gardening. He saw my car every Sunday. Mrs. Alvarez, 2 doors down. She and my grandmother had tea on the first Tuesday of every month. Mr. Dupree, next door. He and I shoveled the walk together every winter. He knew I was there. They will testify to your presence, Dana confirmed. They will testify that I was there every single Sunday, through blizzards, through my residency calls. They will also testify, I added, the cold anger settling deep in my sternum, that they never saw Leah or Connor. Not once, not for a holiday, not for a birthday. They are on the list, Dana wrote. Who else? Teresa Molina. The name brought a brief, welcome warmth. She was my grandmother's housekeeper for 25 years. She came every Saturday, like clockwork. She was more than that, she was a friend. They drink coffee. Teresa knew Margaret's habits, her moods, her mind, better than anyone besides me. Will she speak for you? Teresa loved her. She is furious about this lawsuit. Yes, she will speak. And medical. This was my territory. Dr. Samuel Reeve, I said. He was my grandparents' family doctor for 32 years. He saw her for her last checkup 3 months before she passed. He's meticulous. And his assessment. I knew his assessment because I spoke to him after that appointment. She was 82 years old, had mild hypertension managed with a low-dose medication, and the sharpest mind in Richmond. He will testify that her cognitive faculties were, and I quote him, better than mine. We will depose him immediately, Dana said. We'll get his official assessment on the record before Lang can even find his courtroom makeup. She paused, leaning forward. Now, for their play. Lang won't rely on Leah and Connor. Their testimony is worthless. They are the greedy, absent children. He will bring in an expert, a doctor, probably a psychologist or a geriatric specialist, who will testify that Margaret was confused, susceptible, and paranoid. He will try to invalidate Dr. Reeves' entire 32-year history with a single recent evaluation. How can he do that? That's malpractice. It's opinion, Dr. Bennett. He'll find a hired gun, someone who saw her once, perhaps under duress, and wrote a report tailored to Lang's narrative. Our job is to find the conflict of interest. Find the connection. This expert won't just appear out of thin air. Leah and Connor found him. We need to find out how. Money. It's always money. We find the link. The thought of it made me sick. Someone twisting Margaret's final months, her dignity, into a narrative of dementia for profit. There is one more thing, I said, remembering. Yes? Alan Mercer, my grandmother's financial advisor. When I met with him to settle the estate before this lawsuit, he gave me something. He said Margaret had left a specific instruction with him just in case. I retrieved it from my briefcase. It was a thick 9 by 12 manila envelope. It was sealed not with tape, but with red wax, not a legal stamp, but Margaret's personal one, the stylized W she used on her personal stationery. What is it? I don't know. I haven't opened it. Her instructions to Alan were very specific. It was to be given to my legal counsel unopened, in the event of a challenge to the will. Dana took the envelope. She didn't hold it up to the light. She didn't try to feel its contents. She simply weighed it in her hand. A contingency plan, she said, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile touching the corner of her mouth. Your grandmother was a lawyer's lawyer. She knew this was coming. She knew exactly who her daughter was. She placed the envelope into the new heavy file marked Bennett, estate of. We hold this, Dana said, her voice decisive. We build our entire case on the facts, the journals, the witnesses, the medicals, the neighbors. We will bury them in the truth. And if Victor Lang tries to pull a rabbit out of his hat, if he tries to put one word in your grandmother's mouth, she tapped the sealed envelope. We'll let Margaret have the last word. The courtroom was not a place of comfort. It was a vacuum, cold and silent, where life was pressed flat and examined like a slide under a microscope. Judge Harper Lane presided, her expression neutral, her eyes missing nothing. She remembered my grandmother. I was sure of it, but I knew that would guarantee me no favors. It would only guarantee precision. Dana Morales began. She did not open with an emotional plea. She opened with a box. We begin with the life of Margaret Whiteham, Dana said, her voice clear and devoid of inflection. As documented by Margaret Whiteham herself. She placed the first of the leather-bound journals on the rail. Exhibit A, 35 years of personal diaries. Victor Lang, the plaintiff's attorney, half rose. Objection, hearsay. These are just ramblings. Your Honor, Dana countered smoothly. The plaintiffs have put the deceased's state of mind at issue. These journals are the single most complete record of that mind. They are not being offered to prove the truth of an argument, but to establish a decades-long baseline of cognitive consistency, habits, and relationships. Overruled, Judge Lane said, her eyes on the journal. Proceed, Ms. Morales. Dana didn't read them all. She was surgical. She projected scans onto the large screen. She started with Christmas. Page after page, year after year. December 24, 1997. Leah called. Said she and Connor might drive up. Aurora made them cards. They never arrived. We ate alone. December 25, 2001. Harold and I gave Aurora her first car. She wept. A call from Leah at 9 p.m. asking for money. Not for Christmas, just money. December 24, 2008. Aurora, home from college. The house is full of light. No word from Leah or Connor. The seats are empty. It was a litany of silence, a detailed accounting of abandonment. Dana clicked to the next slide. It was a simple, brutal spreadsheet. We have cross-referenced these diaries with the phone logs of Harold Whiteham, Dana said. In the 10 years leading up to his death, Mr. Whiteham placed 418 calls to the plaintiffs. She pointed to a column. 27 were answered. The average duration was 1 minute and 42 seconds. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, suffocating. This was my life, quantified. This was the sacred bond they were here to defend. Then came the photographs. Dana produced a large foam board, moving it to an easel facing the judge. Exhibit D, a visual history. My life was laid out in 4 by 6 glossies. There I was, 5 years old, missing a front tooth, beaming between Harold and Margaret at my kindergarten play. There I was at 13, awkward in a brace, holding up a science fair trophy, Margaret's arm wrapped around my shoulder. My high school graduation, valedictorian. My college graduation. My white coat ceremony at medical school, my hands shaking as Grandpa Harold, his eyes bright with tears, helped me into the coat. Margaret stood beside him, her smile a mixture of pride and profound satisfaction. In every milestone, Dana said, her voice cutting through the room. In every holiday, every achievement, we find Margaret and Harold Whiteham, the constants, the support, the parents. She then taped a single, grainy photograph to the bottom. It was me, age 2, on their porch. The day I arrived, I whispered, so low only I could hear. The plaintiffs, Dana continued, are in none of these photographs because they were not there. This is emotional theater. Victor Lang boomed, standing up. This has no bearing on the diminished capacity of the deceased. It has every bearing, counsel, Judge Lane snapped, her eyes fixed on the board. The plaintiffs claim they were the natural objects of her affection, wrongfully cut off. Miss Morales is establishing the natural state of that affection. Sit down. The first witness was Teresa Molina. She was dressed in her Sunday best, her hands twisting a handkerchief, but her voice was strong. You cleaned for Mrs. Whiteham, is that correct? Dana asked. Yes, Every Saturday. Were you close? She was a good woman, a strong woman. We drank coffee. She helped my son with his college applications. She was family. In 25 years, Mrs. Molina, how often did you see the plaintiffs, Leah and Connor Hayes, at the house? Teresa looked directly at them. Her eyes were hard. I never saw them. Not one time. And Dr. Bennett? A smile transformed Teresa's face. Oh, Aurora. She was the sun. Every Sunday, even when she was a busy doctor, she came. I knew she was coming. On Saturday, the house, it felt ready. I would leave, and I knew the next day there would be laughter in that kitchen. There would be baking. Miss Margaret, she was never scared of Aurora. She was happy, always happy. The neighbors confirmed it. Mr. Kellogg, 80 years old, testified that he had watched me grow up from his window. That girl never missed a Sunday, he said, his voice steady. There was a blizzard back in, 2014. I think the plows hadn't come. She parked her car a mile away on the main road, and she walked. She walked through 2 feet of snow, carrying a bag of groceries, just to have dinner with her grandma. The weight of the evidence was becoming physical. I could see Leah shifting in her chair. Then Dana called Alan Mercer, the financial advisor. He was all numbers, precise and dispassionate. He presented bank statements. Mrs. Whiteham authorized a recurring monthly transfer, Mercer stated, adjusting his glasses. To whom? Dana asked. To a joint account held by Leah and Connor Hayes. What was the amount? $1,250. And when did this transfer begin? 20 years ago. And when did it end? Upon Mrs. Whiteham's death. Dana put a new slide on the screen. It was a simple equation, $1,250 x 12 months x 20 years. The total was stark and brutal, $300,000. The courtroom was utterly still. Leah had gone pale. Did Mrs. Whiteham ever state the purpose of these funds? She did, Mercer said, consulting his file. It was noted in her financial plan. It was, and I quote, to provide for the upbringing of their other child, Brooke, so that she would not want for anything. It was an allowance for the granddaughter Margaret had never met. A quiet gasp came from the row behind me. I glanced back. A young woman who looked hauntingly like Leah, but younger, paler, stared at the screen. Brooke? Mr. Mercer, Dana continued, did Dr. Bennett, Aurora, receive a similar monthly payment? No, he stated. As per the previous version of the will, Mrs. Whiteham's trust paid Dr. Bennett's medical school tuition directly to the bursar's office. There were no other significant cash disbursements. The contrast hung in the air. $300,000 in cash for the children who left. Tuition for the daughter who stayed. Finally, Dana called Dr. Samuel Reeve. He had been my grandparents' doctor for 32 years. He was the picture of integrity. Dr. Reeve, Dana asked. The plaintiff's alleged Margaret Whiteham was suffering from diminished capacity. In your professional medical opinion, was she? Absolutely not, Dr. Reeve said, his voice firm. Margaret's chart was a model of healthy aging. Her blood pressure was managed. Her mind was formidable. Her long-term memory was flawless, and her short-term recall was excellent. She managed her own finances, her own medications, and her own decisions. She was never diagnosed with dementia, Alzheimer's. Never. The suggestion is absurd. Thank you, Doctor. Dana turned to the judge. Your Honor, we submit our final piece of evidence on this matter, Dana stated. Exhibit F, a video recording from 7 months ago. Mrs. Whiteham was a guest lecturer via Zoom for a seminar at Windermere School of Law. The screen lit up, and there she was. My throat closed. She was in her study, her hair silver, her reading glasses perched on her nose, but her eyes were sharp, electric. And the fallacy of the plaintiff's argument in that case, she was saying, her voice clear and strong, is that they confuse proximity with influence. The court rightly decided that mere opportunity does not equate to coercion. A testator's mind is their own. To argue otherwise without concrete proof of manipulation is not just bad law, it is an insult to the autonomy of the elderly. She was brilliant. She was clear. She was passionate. She was, in that moment, more alive than anyone in the courtroom. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence was absolute. The image of a vibrant, lucid Margaret Whiteham shattered the plaintiff's entire premise. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Dana Morales sat down. The defense has established its baseline. Your Honor. Judge Lane looked at the plaintiff's table. Victor Lang had been quiet for a long time. I looked over, expecting to see defeat, a man preparing to cut his losses. I was wrong. He was smiling. A slow, satisfied smile that chilled my blood. He rose, buttoning his jacket. A beautiful story, Miss Morales. Truly a testament to curated evidence. He turned to Judge Lane, his smile widening. The plaintiffs, Your Honor, would now like to introduce the facts. We call to the stand Dr. Nolan Pierce. Dr. Nolan Pierce. The name hung in the air, meaningless to me. Victor Lang called him with the confidence of a magician producing his star exhibit. A man in his late 40s with a perfectly tailored suit and a face composed in lines of deep professional sympathy. Walked to the stand. He looked credible. He looked expensive. Lang began by establishing his credentials. Board-certified psychiatrist, with a specialization in geriatric psychology and cognitive disorders. He practically underlined the words geriatric psychology, a clear, direct shot at Dr. Reeves' credibility. Reeve, who was only a family practitioner. And Dr. Pierce, you maintain a practice in Ridgemorne? Lang asked. In Fairview. Actually, Pierce replied, his voice smooth and reassuring, I opened my clinic there about 9 months ago. 9 months. I wrote the words on my legal pad. Fairview was a 40-minute drive. My grandmother hadn't left Ridgemorne in 2 years. And in your professional capacity, Dr. Lang continued, did you have occasion to evaluate the deceased, Margaret Whiteham? I did. Pierce opened a sleek leather-bound folder. I was retained by her daughter, Mrs. Leah Hayes, who expressed profound concern over her mother's rapidly declining mental state and her isolation. Retained. The word landed like a stone. Not consulted, not referred, retained. And what did your evaluation find, Dr. Pierce? Pierce put on a pair of glasses. I conducted 2 in-person evaluations. It was clear to me that Mrs. Whiteham was suffering from significant cognitive decline. A ripple of sound went through the gallery. I felt my hands grip the edge of the table. Could you be specific for the court? The patient exhibited classic markers. She was highly anxious, almost paranoid. She suffered from pronounced memory lapses, confusion regarding dates and times. For instance, she could not recall what she had eaten for breakfast that morning on my first visit. A lie. A complete, total lie. She was also deeply agitated, Pierce continued, his voice dropping to a confidential, compassionate tone. She seemed to feel trapped, manipulated. Trapped by whom? Lang asked, his voice soft. Pierce looked up from his file. He turned his eyes on me. It was a performance of immense skill. He looked at me not with accusation, but with deep therapeutic pity. She expressed a significant, and in my opinion, paranoid fixation on her granddaughter, Aurora. She was deeply distressed about her will. She felt pressured. He paused, as if bracing himself to deliver the final, painful blow. She said she was afraid. She told me she is just waiting for my money. The air left my body. The courtroom noise faded to a dull, high-pitched whine. Just waiting for my money. The words were a violation. They were a desecration. He was taking our Sundays, our shared silence in the garden, the scent of carrot cake in the warm kitchen, the weight of her hand on mine after a long shift, and twisting it all into this cheap, ugly motive. He was painting me as a vulture and her as a terrified, feeble old woman. He was making our love profane. I felt Dana's hand on my arm, her fingers pressing lightly, a silent command, stay still. Let him finish. He is walking into it. Lang turned to Dana. Your witness, Miss Morales. He sat down, a look of profound smug satisfaction on his face. He had just delivered the kill shot. He had given the court a board-certified expert, who said Margaret was confused and that I was a predator. Dana Morales stood up. She did not approach the witness. She stayed by our table. She smiled. It was the first time I had seen her smile in court. It was not a reassuring expression. It was the smile of a surgeon who has just identified the precise location of the tumor. Dr. Pierce, she began. Pierce, she began, her voice light, almost conversational. 9 months in practice in Fairview. Congratulations. Starting a new clinic is always a challenge. We are managing. Thank you, Pierce said, still encased in his professional calm. I'm sure it helps to have a strong partner. You didn't open this practice alone, did you? Pierce's smile faltered, just a fraction. No, I'm in practice with Dr. Peterson. Wyatt Sloan. Dr. Wyatt Sloan, Dana repeated, savoring each word. An internist. And correct me if I'm wrong. Dr. Wyatt Sloan is the first cousin of the plaintiff, Connor Hayes. A collective intake of breath. Victor Lang was on his feet before the sentence was finished. Objection. Relevance. Relevance. Dana's voice was suddenly a hammer. It is the only thing that is relevant. It speaks directly to bias, conspiracy, and a profound conflict of interest. The plaintiff's expert witness is in business with the plaintiff's immediate family. Overruled, Judge Lane said, her voice ice. She was staring at Pierce. The witness will answer the question. Pierce was visibly sweating now. Wyatt is my partner. I believe he's a cousin. Yes. I don't see how that impacts my medical findings. Oh, I think you do, Dana said, walking forward. Let's talk about those findings. You saw Margaret Whiteham twice at her home. That is correct. Who arranged these meetings? Leah Hayes. Did you call first? Did you identify yourself as a psychiatrist coming to perform a cognitive evaluation on her? Well, no, Pierce stammered. Mrs. Hayes was concerned her mother would refuse. She introduced me as a friend to make her more comfortable. So you lied. You entered an elderly woman's home under false pretenses. You deceived her. We were concerned. You were retained, Dana corrected. And in these 2 visits conducted under a lie, did you at any point consult her primary care physician of 32 years, Dr. Samuel Reeve? It was not necessary for my assessment. You didn't think reviewing her charts was necessary. Her blood work, her prescription history, her 32-year medical baseline. You, a man who had known her for 5 minutes, decided you knew more than the doctor who had treated her for 3 decades. My clinical observations are my own. Your observations are contradicted, Dana snapped. She retrieved a file. Dr. Reeves' file, Exhibit G. He saw Mrs. Whitcomb for a routine checkup 1 week before your first ambush. She projected the notes. Patient is lucid, in good spirits, discussed current events, blood pressure stable, no signs of cognitive impairment. That, Dana said, is the note from before your visit. She changed the slide. Now let's look at the note from after. It was an urgent note. Patient called, highly agitated. State's daughter Leah arrived unannounced with a strange man who asked prying questions about her finances and her will. Patient reports high anxiety. Dana turned to Pierce. Her face was a mask of cold contempt. You didn't diagnose anxiety, Dr. Pierce. You and Leah Hayes caused it. You didn't observe paranoia. You created it. You walked into her home, lied about who you were, and interrogated her about her money on behalf of the people suing her. Who wouldn't be paranoid? I was assessing. You were performing, Dana shot back. And you weren't the only one. She looked at the judge. Dr. Pierce opened a clinic with the plaintiff's cousin 9 months ago. He is retained by the plaintiff. He gains access to the deceased under false pretenses. He fails to consult with her doctor of 32 years, and he, by sheer coincidence, produces a diagnosis that is the only thing that could possibly give the plaintiffs a claim to this estate. She looked at Pierce one last time, her voice dropping, thick with disgust. This wasn't a medical evaluation. This was a service. This wasn't a diagnosis. It was a bill of goods, ordered and paid for. She walked back to our table and sat down. The silence was absolute. Victor Lang was speechless, his face a mottled red. He looked, for the very first time, completely adrift. Judge Harper Lane stared at Dr. Pierce. She said nothing. She simply picked up her pen and began to write. She wrote note after note, her pen scratching furiously across the yellow legal pad. She didn't look up for a full 2 minutes. The air in the courtroom, already thin, seemed to eviscerate. Dr. Pierce had been dismissed, his credibility dissolving under the harsh lights. He looked less like an expert and more like a co-conspirator. Victor Lang's theatrical objection had died in his throat. Dana Morales did not pause. She did not allow the tension to break. As Dr. Pierce hurried from the courtroom, she turned her body, her sharp, minimalist suit a stark contrast to Lang's baggy, expensive pinstripes. The defense calls Connor Hayes to the stand. My biological father, the man whose features I supposedly shared, but whose face I only knew from a single faded photograph Harold had kept in a locked drawer. He looked older than the man in the picture. Of course, his hair was thin, his shoulders slumped. He looked, more than anything, deeply uncomfortable. He looked like a man who had been convinced to do something against his better judgment, and was only now realizing the cost. He took the oath, his hand trembling slightly. Mr. Hayes, Dana began. Hayes, Dana began, her voice neutral. You are the plaintiff in this case. Yes, Leah and I, we are. And you are the biological father of Dr. Aurora Bennett. Yes. He glanced at me, a quick, nervous tick. I looked back, my expression, I hoped, nothing more than clinical curiosity. I felt my heart, the muscle I studied and repaired every day, beating its steady, uninterrupted rhythm. It did not recognize him. You are suing, Dana continued, on the grounds that your sacred bond as a parent was ignored, that you are the natural object of Margaret Whiteham's affection. We are her family. She's our daughter. Family, Dana repeated, as if testing the word. Let's speak about that bond. A bond requires presence. Wouldn't you agree? Effort. Yes, I suppose. In the 31 years since you left Dr. Bennett on your in-law's porch, how many of her school graduations did you attend? He shifted in the witness box. It was a long time ago. I do not recall the specific number. That must be because the number is difficult to grasp, Dana said, her voice laced with an Arctic chill. Let me assist you. The number is 0. She held up the photo board, the one from our exhibit. 0 kindergarten graduations, 0 middle school honor roll ceremonies, 0 high school valedictory speeches, 0 college commencements, and 0 medical school graduations. She tapped the photo of me in my white coat, Harold and Margaret beaming on either side of me. You were not here. You were never there. I remembered that medical school graduation. I had foolishly saved a seat, a single empty seat in the back row, just in case. The depth of that adolescent hope embarrassed me now. But surely, Dana pressed on, even though you could not attend, you kept up with her life as a loving father would. Of course, Connor said, his voice defensive. I always knew what she was up to. Then please tell the court, what is her profession? He froze. It was a complete deer-in-headlights freeze. The silence stretched. He was guessing. I could see him rifling through vague, third-hand information. She's in business, he finally ventured. Finance. Something with numbers. A low murmur rippled through the gallery. It was a sound of collective disbelief, sharp and sudden. Victor Lang put his head in his hands. She is a cardiologist, Mr. Hayes. Dana said, her voice cutting through the noise. She is Dr. Aurora Bennett. She saves lives at the Riverside Heart Institute. She repairs the human heart. The irony hung in the air, thick and suffocating. What is her current home address? I don't have it memorized. Who is her best friend? The woman who was the maid of honor at her wedding. Oh, wait. She is not married. Who is her emergency contact then? I don't know. When is her birthday? It's in the spring. What hospital is she affiliated with? What are her on-call hours? Is she allergic to penicillin? I do not know, he snapped, his composure breaking. She never told me. She never reached out. She never reached out, Dana repeated, letting the words echo. The child you abandoned at age 2. The child whose graduations you missed. The child whose entire life is a mystery to you. She never reached out. She turned to Judge Lane. This man is suing for a share of an estate based on a bond with a daughter he cannot identify in a lineup. No further questions. Connor Hayes all but fled the stand. The defense calls Leah Hayes. Now the air changed. This was the main event. Leah walked to the stand, a black dress, a single strand of pearls. She looked like a grieving daughter, a performance she had clearly practiced. She sniffled as she swore the oath, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. Mrs. Hayes, Dana began. You claim your mother, Margaret Whiteham, was of diminished capacity. She was a wonderful woman, Leah whispered, her voice cracking. But she was old. She was confused. She wasn't herself at the end. The end you would know nothing about, Dana stated. Let's review. We have established you received $1,250 a month from your mother, every month, for 20 years. $300,000 in total. Correct? It was support, Leah said, defensive. She was my mother. She was helping me. Helping her granddaughter, Brooke. Ah yes, Brooke. The child you did keep in those 20 years, Mrs. Hayes, while you were cashing those $300,000 in checks. How many times did you visit your mother's home? Leah was silent. How many times did you see her face to face to thank her for her generosity? Still silent. Let me help you, Dana said, using the same cruel phrase she had used on Connor. The visitor logs, the witness testimony from Teresa Molina, the testimony from the neighbors, the answer is 0. 20 years of payments, 0 visits. Why not? Dana pressed, her voice a surgeon's scalpel. Why did you not visit the mother you claim was confused and isolated? Leah finally looked up, her eyes swimming in manufactured tears. It was too painful, she whispered. The courtroom leaned in. It was just too painful seeing that house. It reminded me of everything. It reminded me of leaving Aurora, the grief, the regret. It was too much. I couldn't bear it. It was a masterful performance, the grieving mother, torn apart by her own tragic choices. Too painful, Dana repeated, her voice flat, devoid of sympathy. Too painful to visit. But not, she paused, too painful to cash the checks. Objection. Lang yelled. Withdrawn, Dana said smoothly. Mrs. Hayes, your profound grief did not, however, prevent you from contacting your mother, did it, when you needed more money? I kept her updated. Your Honor, Dana continued, Exhibit H, text messages from the plaintiff to Margaret Whiteham in the final 3 months of her life. The screen lit up, my stomach clenched. I had not seen these. Leah Hayes, 92 days ago, Mom, you need to answer. Brooke needs a new car for school. The allowance is not enough. Leah Hayes, 60 days ago, ignoring me is childish. I know you are in there. I know you have money set aside. Connor says I have rights. Leah Hayes, 45 days ago, Dr. Pierce said you were confused. I'm worried about you. Just sign the check and I'll know you're okay. My blood ran cold. The setup. The expert was part of the threat. Leah Hayes, 21 days ago, if you cut me out, you will regret it. I'll take it all. I swear to God, I will tell everyone how Aurora is poisoning you against me. You owe me this. The courtroom was dead silent. These were not the messages of a concerned daughter, Dana stated. They were the threats of an extortionist. Does this sound like a woman consumed by grief? Mrs. Hayes? Dana asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Or does this sound like a woman intimidating an 82-year-old woman? Leah was no longer crying. Her face was pale, her eyes hard. The mask was gone. I risked a glance behind me. The young woman, Brooke, was staring at the screen. Her face was white with shock. She looked horrified. She looked ashamed. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I saw panic and a sudden, sickening realization. She looked away, her hands trembling. Victor Lang was on his feet, his face red. This is a distraction. This is character assassination. My client was distressed. This is a family matter. Families are complicated. All we are asking for is what is fair. The law recognizes blood. A child cannot be disinherited simply for a disagreement. Dana turned to him, her gaze withering. Fairness. Fairness is not some magical concept your honor dispenses like a wish, Mr. Lang. Fairness is not magic. It is evidence. And the evidence shows 30 years of abandonment, $300,000 taken, and textbook elder abuse. Do not lecture this defense on fairness. She turned back to Leah. In fact, let's talk about your most recent attempt at a fair family reconciliation, 2 days after your mother's funeral. Did you contact Dr. Bennett? Bennett? I reached out to my daughter. Yes, Leah said, trying to regain her footing. To grieve with her. To grieve, Your Honor. Exhibit I, A legally recorded voicemail left on Dr. Bennett's phone. The timestamp is 2 days after Margaret Whiteham's death. Before the will was read. Dana pressed a button. A click, and then Leia's voice, not the whispered, broken voice from the stand. Aurora, it's your mother, Leia. Look, I know this is all awful. I'm devastated, but I know Mom. She was always fair. Before this gets messy with lawyers, just call me. We can settle this, you and me. 50 of 50. It's the only right thing to do. 50 of 50. Call me. The audio cut off. 50 of 50. Not, I am so sorry for your loss. Not, are you okay? Not, I regret everything. 50 of 50. A business proposition. The opening bid for the spoils of a life she had never touched. Dana Morales looked at the judge, then at Leia. No further questions for this grieving mother, Your Honor. The 50 of 50 voicemail clicked off, but the words continued to echo in the profound silence. Leia Hayes sat frozen, exposed, her mask of maternal grief stripped away to reveal the raw, acquisitive core beneath. She looked at Victor Lang, but he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at his notes, his face slack, a general surveying a battlefield he had already lost. Dana Morales did not give the moment air. She did not let them recover. The defense recalls Alan Mercer, she announced. Mercer, the financial advisor, walked back to the stand, his demeanor as precise and unemotional as it had been the first time. Mr. Mercer, Dana began, you testified earlier regarding the financial arrangements Mrs. Whiteham made. But you also mentioned a specific instruction, a contingency. That is correct, Mercer said. Mrs. Whiteham was a woman of exceptional foresight. Objection, Lang mumbled, his voice. The fact, Your Honor, Mercer said, is that Mrs. Whiteham entrusted me with a letter to be held in trust. Her instructions, which she provided in writing, were that this document was to be given to her executor, and subsequently her legal counsel only in the event that her last will and testament was formally challenged by either Leia or Connor Hayes. She anticipated this lawsuit, Dana stated. She anticipated the challenge, Mercer corrected. She understood their character. Objection. Overruled, Judge Lane snapped. It's foundational. Do you have this letter, Miss Morales? We do, Your Honor. Dana walked back to our table and retrieved the heavy manila envelope. The red wax seal, stamped with Margaret's stylized W, was still intact. She presented it to the clerk, who showed it to the judge. It is sealed, the judge noted. It is, Your Honor. We ask permission to unseal it and enter its contents into evidence. Lang was trapped. To object to Margaret's own words would be to admit he was afraid of them. Permission granted. The courtroom held its breath. I watched Dana slide a thin letter opener beneath the wax. She broke the seal with clean, surgical precision. She reached into the envelope and pulled out several pages of thick, cream-colored stationery covered in my grandmother's unmistakable, elegant script. She read it, her face impassive. I watched her eyes scan the first page, then the second. She looked up, and then she did the last thing I expected. She folded the letter and placed it very deliberately on the edge of her table. Your Honor, she said, her voice ringing with a new, sudden authority. The contents of this letter are, as anticipated, explosive, but they are also a summary. Before we read Margaret Whiteham's final words, I ask the court's indulgence to present the final corroborating facts that made this letter necessary. I believe this letter will be most effective as part of our closing argument. Judge Lane looked intrigued. She recognized the maneuver. Dana was setting a trap. A strategic delay, Miss Morales. Very well. The court will wait. Proceed. Dana turned, leaving the letter in plain sight, a time bomb waiting to detonate. She turned to the monitors. "We have discussed the $300,000. She said, "the sum the plaintiffs received over 20 years. Mr. Lang has argued this was merely familial support. We argue it was something else." A new slide flashed onto the screen. It was the simple, brutal spreadsheet of the payments, but now Dana had added a title written in large, bold text, asterisk asterisk total $300,000. An investment in the child they chose to raise. This was not support for Leah and Connor, Dana said, her voice cutting. This was Margaret Whitem paying for the life of her other granddaughter, the one she never met, the one the plaintiffs chose to keep. Brooke? I saw the young woman in the back row flinch at her name. We subpoenaed the email records associated with that account, Dana continued. And we found the receipts. A new slide, an email from Leah to Margaret, dated 5 years ago, subject, braces. Mom, the transfer isn't enough this month. Brooke's orthodontist says she needs braces and they want half the total, $1,800 upfront. I need this by Friday. Another, subject, winter coat. Mom, I know you just sent the check, but Brooke had a growth spurt and her old coat is useless. She's going on the school ski trip. She needs a good one. I don't have it. Please don't let her be the only one. Another, Brooke's at prep course, another, Brooke's car insurance. It was a relentless, one-sided barrage of financial demands, all leveraging the well-being of the daughter they had kept for 20 years. Dana summarized, Margaret Whitem funded the life of the child they chose, while the child they abandoned sat by her side, cooked her Sunday dinners, and asked for nothing but her time. This is irrelevant. Victor Lang bellowed, finally finding his footing. This is prejudicial. What Mrs. Whitem chose to gift her other grandchild has no bearing on this case. It has every bearing on this case, counsel, Judge Lane said, her voice sharp. It speaks directly to the plaintiff's motives. It establishes a long-term pattern of financial dependency and expectation. It is the very definition of relevant. Objection overruled, Dana continued, her pace accelerating. She was building the walls of her fortress. The plaintiff's entire case rests on the fiction of an isolated, feeble-minded woman. We will now dismantle that fiction permanently. She didn't recall the witnesses. She submitted their supplemental affidavits. Reading the key lines into the record. A supplemental affidavit from Dr. Samuel Reeve, she announced. Quote, Margaret Whitem was, in all my 32 years of practice, one of my most competent patients. She kept her own ledgers. She paid her own bills. She reconciled her own bank statements by hand. On the first of every month, she would come to appointments with a list of questions regarding her medications. She was in fuller command of her faculties than most people half her age. Another document, Dana continued, her voice softening, a supplemental affidavit from Teresa Molina. Just a fraction. Quote, people say she was isolated. That is a lie. I was there every Saturday. The house was quiet, but I was cleaning up after the life that happened every Sunday. Flowers on the counter, 2 wine glasses by the sink, the smell of cinnamon. She was not isolated. She was waiting for Aurora. She would tell me about the old black and white movie they argued about. She was never afraid. She was happy. My throat constricted. The carrot cake, the debates over Hitchcock versus Wilder. And finally, Dana said, the neighbors, Mr. Kellogg and Mrs. Alvarez. Alvarez. She projected their statements. They confirmed my car every Sunday without fail. They confirmed the blizzard. But Dana had asked them one more question. Did you ever see Leah and Connor Hayes at the house? Mr. Kellogg's affidavit was read aloud. I saw them maybe 3 times in the last decade. Always around Christmas. They never stayed. They never even got out of the car at the same time. The woman, Leah, would run up to the porch, pick up a package that was sitting there, and run back to the car. They would drive away. They never knocked. They were just picking up a gift. The final piece. Dana returned to the phone records. The calls from my grandfather, Harold. We showed the court the number of calls Harold Whiteham made to the plaintiffs. Now, she said, we show you when he made them. A new chart appeared. It was a timeline of my life. June 1998, Aurora Bennett's high school graduation. Beside it, 14 missed calls from Harold Whiteham to Leah Hayes. May 2002, Aurora Bennett's college graduation. Beside it, 8 missed calls from Harold Whiteham to Leah Hayes. May 2006, Aurora Bennett's medical school graduation. Beside it, 12 missed calls from Harold Whiteham to Leah Hayes. He had tried. My grandfather, my father, every single time he had tried to get them to show up for me, and every single time they had sent his plea to voicemail. The case was no longer a case, it was an autopsy. The journals proved my presence. The medicals proved her mind. The neighbors proved my consistency. The housekeeper proved our relationship. The finances proved their motive. The phone records proved their absence. The voicemail proved their greed. Victor Lang sat defeated. There was nothing left to argue. Your Honor, Dana said, her voice quiet but ringing with finality. The defense has presented its evidence. We are prepared to proceed to closing arguments. She walked to the table and picked up the folded letter. And as the central part of that argument, she said, we are at last ready to let Margaret Whiteham speak. The adrenaline of the cross-examinations had long since evaporated, leaving a sterile silence in its wake. The court had recessed for the day, a pause before the final arguments. I sat in the hard plastic chair of the witness room, the door closed, listening to the muffled sounds of the hallway. I kept replaying their testimony, not just the lies, but the very words they used. Victor Lang, in his theatrical summation of Dr. Pierce's testimony, had referred to me as the lone, calculated beneficiary. Leah, in her manufactured grief, had wept about being pushed aside. But it was Connor, my biological father, who had inadvertently supplied the theme. He had looked at me, a stranger, and justified his lawsuit by saying, we are family. She's our daughter. They had used the words robber and thief in their depositions. They had called me a cuckoo in the nest. A cold, sharp sensation traced its way down my spine, a feeling I recognized from the cardiac unit, the chill that precedes a fatal arrhythmia. They believed this. They had constructed a reality where they were the victims, and I, the one who had stayed, was the interloper. My presence was my crime. But my eyes, as I sat there, were fixed on the evidence, not the legal exhibits, but my own. I closed my eyes, and the sterile beige room dissolved. I was 12 years old again. It was a Sunday in late October. The kitchen windows were steamed from the oven. I had decided, with all the clumsy hubris of a 12-year-old, to make the carrot cake myself, from start to finish. I had measured the flour. I had grated the carrots, and I'd forgotten to check the timer. The edges were black, not just brown, charred. A plume of acrid smoke filled the kitchen. I pulled the pan out, my eyes stinging, and I knew I had ruined it. I had ruined Sunday. The ritual was broken. Margaret walked in, drawn by the smell. She looked at the smoking pan, then at my face, which was streaked with flour and tears. She didn't scold me. She didn't sigh. She simply tilted her head. Well, she said, her voice dry and practical. I've always found the edges to be structurally superfluous. She took a knife and, with the precision of a surgeon, she carved a perfect circle out of the center, leaving the blackened ring behind. She placed the piece on her favorite china plate, added a defiant-looking dollop of cream cheese frosting, and took a bite. "It is," she announced. "Absolutely special." "It's burnt," I whispered, defeated. "I didn't say it was perfect," she corrected me, taking another deliberate bite. "I said it was special. It's special because you were here to make it." My eyes opened. The courtroom walls snapped back into focus. "Because you were here." That was the truth. That was the entire case. They could call it influence. They could call it theft. Margaret had called it presence. I began to understand what was truly at stake. If I lost this, it wasn't just the house on Sycamore Avenue. It wasn't just the money they so desperately craved. If I lost, the court, in the name of the law my grandmother revered, would validate their version of the story. It would mean her final, deliberate act of love would be struck from the record, dismissed as the incoherent rambling of a confused old woman. It would mean they had succeeded in silencing her. This was not an inheritance fight. This was an attempt to overwrite a life. My life and hers. I was not just defending a will. I was defending her voice. "Do not let them pull you into the mud," Dana's voice, from our meeting earlier that week, cut through my reflection. We were prepping for the closing. "They will try." Lang's entire strategy is emotion. He will talk about blood. He will talk about a mother's pain. He wants you to get angry. He wants you to weep. He wants you to look like an unstable, emotional girl. She had leaned across her steel desk, her eyes like polished stones. "You are not. You are Dr. Aurora Bennett. You are a scientist. You speak the language of truth. We will not engage with their narrative. We will simply present ours. And ours is built on 30 years of facts. Let the law do the work." That night, the night before the closing arguments, the mud came for me. My phone, which had been buzzing on silent in my bag, became a torrent. The local paper had run a story on the trial, and the dam of privacy had broken. "Are you okay?" A text from my chief of cardiology. "This is monstrous. Your grandmother was a giant. Don't let these jackals win." An email from an old professor. But for every message of support, there were others. Anonymous numbers, hidden profiles. "Shame on you. Stealing from your own mother. You'll get what you deserve in court. You greedy thief. Leah and Connor are good people. You're the one who tore that family apart." I saw it for what it was, a desperate, last-ditch effort to unnerve me, to pull me down to their level. I read every single message. I documented them. I took screenshots. And then I turned off my notifications. I would not reply. Dana was right. The law would be my only answer. I sat in the dark of my apartment. The silence was heavy. Just as I was about to turn the phone off completely, one last message lit up the screen. It was not anonymous. Brooke Hayes. I had never spoken to her in my life. I had only seen her in the courtroom, a pale, younger echo of Leah, watching from the back row. Her face a mask of shock and shame as the emails about her braces and her ski coat had flashed on the screen. My thumb hovered, then pressed. "Hi, I know this is crazy. My mom, this is all wrong. I saw the emails about my car, my braces. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was coming from her. I thought my dad." The message was a long, panicked, rambling confession of ignorance. I scrolled down, my stomach tightening. "Look, when you win, and I know you're going to win, could you maybe give me a part of it? Not for them. For me, just so I can get away, get to college on my own. Isn't that what Grandma Margaret would have wanted? For me to have a chance. My blood ran cold. It was the same poison, just in a different bottle. The same transactional blood. What can I get? She was her mother's daughter, after all. I did not reply. I turned the phone off completely. Sleep was impossible. The air in my apartment felt thin and wrong. I needed the silence of the house. I needed her. I drove across town. It was past midnight. I didn't go inside the house on Sycamore. I went to the garden. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and roses. I walked to her favorite bush, the MME, Caroline Testud, its pale pink blooms luminous in the moonlight. I cut a single, perfect flower. From there, I drove to the cemetery. The two headstones stood side by side, solid and eternal, Harold and Margaret. I placed the single rose in the vase, replacing the faded flowers from last Sunday. It's almost over, I whispered to the granite. They tried to say you were confused. They tried to say I was a thief. Tomorrow, we read your letter. Tomorrow, you get to speak. I rested my hand on the cold stone of her name. A new promise formed, solidifying in the quiet darkness. I will protect you. I will protect your choice, and I will be back. Sunday will still happen. Someone will still be sitting at your table. I promise. I drove back to the house. I couldn't sleep there. Not yet. But I went inside, just for a moment. I walked through the dark hall to the kitchen. I opened the pantry door. There it was, hanging on its familiar brass hook, her old apron. It was a faded cotton printed with blue flowers, stained with decades of flour, nutmeg, and what looked like blueberry pie. I took it down. It smelled faintly of her, of cinnamon and paper and safety. I folded it carefully and placed it in the briefcase I was taking to court. It was not a weapon. It was a talisman. It was my own baseline of truth. Dawn came. I had not slept. I stood at my apartment window and watched the sky over Ridgemorn lighten. Not with a cinematic sunrise, but with a flat, heavy grey. It was a cloudy, overcast day. I showered. I dressed. I put on a dark suit, armor of a different kind. I placed the folded apron in my bag. As I drove to the courthouse, the world was moving. People were getting coffee. Cars were on the road. Their lives were normal. Mine was about to be decided. But the fear, the tremors from the night before, they were gone. I was no longer the grieving granddaughter. I was no longer the angry victim. I was a cardiologist about to begin a complex procedure. I was prepared. I knew the facts. I had my talisman. The sky was heavy and grey, but I saw the path. It was narrow. It was hard, but it was absolutely clear. Victor Lang rose for his closing argument. The swagger was gone, replaced by a desperate, theatrical solemnity. He had no facts left. His expert was a co-conspirator. His clients were documented extortionists. All he had left was an appeal to sentiment. He turned, facing the gallery, not the judge. Family, he said, his voice dropping, resonant. In this room, we have been drowning in spreadsheets, in photographs, in 30-year-old journals. But what is at the heart of this? What is the truth? He placed a hand over his heart. The truth is blood. The truth is that Leah and Connor Hayes are the children of Margaret Whiteham. A bond that cannot be broken by a piece of paper. A bond that is a sacred human birthright. To disinherit your own child, it is an act against nature. He paused, letting the words hang. He seeks to paint my clients as monsters. But what is a family but a complex, sometimes painful web of relationships? Are we to be punished, disowned, cast aside for our imperfections? Or is the bond of a mother, the bond of a child, stronger than that? We are asking the court to heal this family, to see this will for what it is, the product of undue influence, a final, tragic act of isolation and confusion. We ask you to set it aside and restore the natural order. He sat down. The air was thick with his performance. Dana Morales stood. She was a column of grey steel. Mr. Lang speaks of nature, she said, her voice sharp and clear, slicing through the emotional haze. The defense prefers to speak of the law. He speaks of a natural order. We will speak of transparent intent. She nodded to the clerk. The court has already viewed the video of Mrs. Whitem lecturing at Windermere School of Law 7 months ago, establishing her baseline lucidity. My grandmother's face, sharp and intelligent, filled the screen again. We asked the court, Dana said, to view the final 60 seconds of that same lecture. 6 months before she passed away, the video resumed. Margaret was answering a student's question. And the fallacy in that argument, which you must always guard against, is the emotional appeal. A will is the final and most permanent voice a person has. The court's duty is not to fix a family it deems broken. The court's duty is not to rewrite a testator's history. If the mind is sound and the intent is transparent, the court's only duty is to execute that intent. To do otherwise is to erase a life. We are guardians of that final voice. The screen went black. Guardians of that final voice, Dana repeated. But the plaintiffs, Your Honor, did not want to guard that voice. They wanted to silence it, and they took active medical steps to do so. Lang looked up, alarmed. The plaintiff's entire case, Dana continued, rested on the manufactured diagnosis of Dr. Nolan Pierce. We have established his conflict of interest. Now we establish the active conspiracy. She produced a new document, Exhibit L, a billing record from the Fairview Clinic, co-owned by Dr. Pierce and the plaintiff's cousin, Dr. Wyatt Sloan. It is a prescription filed the day after Dr. Pierce's first fraudulent visit to Mrs. Whitem's home. What is the prescription? The judge asked, leaning forward. One prescription for lorazepam, a sedative. My breath caught. Dr. Reeves' 32-year history shows Mrs. Whitem was never prescribed an anti-anxiety medication. Not once. But one day after Leah and her hired expert ambushed my grandmother and interrogated her about her finances, they obtain a prescription for a powerful sedative. To treat the anxiety they caused, or to induce the very confusion they intended to allege. The room was stone cold. This was not just greed. This was malice. And to finalize the matter of Dr. Pierce, Dana said, we submit Exhibit M, the business registration for the Fairview Clinic. The partners are Pierce and Sloan, as we know, but the registered agent for the corporation, the man who filed the paperwork, the man who holds the financial stake is the plaintiff, Connor Hayes. Connor went white. He looked at Leah, his eyes wide with betrayal. He had been found out, not just as a plaintiff, but as the money behind the fraud. Victor Lang, for the first time, looked truly defeated. He slumped in his chair. The isolation, he stammered, his last desperate defense. The will is still the product of isolation. She was alone with that girl week after week, a captive. Dana did not even honor him with a look. She continued, her voice accelerating, building a rhythm of pure, unassailable fact. Isolation. Mr. Lang, I refer you to the testimony of Teresa Molina, who stated, I had my own key for 25 years. I entered every Saturday. How can a person be isolated when the housekeeper has a key? I refer you, she went on, to the photographs from the neighbors, submitted this morning, a snow-covered street with one single set of tire tracks, the tire tracks of Aurora Bennett's car, proving she was present every single Sunday, even in a blizzard. I refer you, she said, her voice rising, to the final supplemental affidavit from Dr. Samuel Reeve, who states, there has never been a diagnosis of dementia. There has never been a diagnosis of cognitive decline. The claim is a fabrication. The evidence was overwhelming. It was an avalanche. Dana had one final witness. Mr. Mercer, she said, we have established the $300,000 Mrs. Whitem sent to the plaintiffs. Was there ever any other financial provision considered? Yes, Mercer adjusted his glasses. 2 years ago, Mrs. Whitem requested I draft documents for a small educational trust for her other granddaughter, Brooke Hayes. In the back row, I saw Brooke's head snap up. She stared at Mercer, her face a mask of confusion. What was the status of that trust? Dana asked. It was never funded. Mrs. Whitem instructed me to dissolve the paperwork. Did she give a reason? She did. Mercer looked at his notes. Mrs. Whitem had offered to fund the trust contingent on one meeting. She wanted Leah to bring Brooke to lunch. She wanted to meet her granddaughter. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of something, a sadness for a meeting that never was. And did this lunch occur? No, Mercer said. According to Mrs. Whitem's journal, Leah Hayes cancelled the meeting 3 separate times. The final time, Leah claimed they were too busy. After that, Mercer continued, Mrs. Whitem called me and said, Alan, a person who is too busy for lunch is too busy for an inheritance. She instructed me to finalize the will, leaving all assets to Dr. Bennett. A sound split the courtroom. It was not a word, it was a cry of pure, agonizing realization. Brooke Hayes was on her feet. She lied. Brooke screamed, pointing not at me, but at her own mother. She lied to me. Brooke, sit down, Leah hissed, grabbing her arm. Order. Judge Lane's gavel slammed down. Order. She told me you didn't want to meet me, Brooke was sobbing, her voice breaking. She said you were sick and that Aurora kept you away. She lied about everything. I want to speak. Please, Miss Hayes, you are not a witness in this case, Judge Lane said, her voice firm. You will be silent, or you will be removed from my courtroom. She lied. Brooke shrieked one last time as Connor, and a furious Leah physically dragged her back into her seat. The entire courtroom had witnessed it, the spectacular, public self-destruction of the plaintiff's family. The lies, the manipulation, it was all laid bare. The room, after the outburst, was deathly quiet. There was nothing left to say. Every lie had been exposed, every fabrication shattered. Dana Morales stood in the center of the room. She walked back to the defense table. She picked up the sheaf of cream-colored stationery, the letter she had unsealed hours before. The letter with the red wax W. She held it up. Your Honor, she said, her voice ringing in the absolute silence. The plaintiffs have spoken. The witnesses have spoken. The defense has spoken. It is time, at last, to let Margaret Whitem speak. The silence in the courtroom was a physical thing, a thick, pressurized stillness that pressed against my eardrums. Brooke's cry had been an explosion, and this was the vacuum that followed. Leah and Connor Hayes sat like statues, the image of their daughter's betrayal still hanging in the air. Victor Lang, for his part, looked not just defeated, but irrelevant. All the air had been sucked out of his theatrical sales pitch. Dana Morales stood, and the focus of the entire room, including Judge Lane, snapped to her. She walked to the defense table, but she didn't retrieve a document. She retrieved the heavy cream-colored manila envelope. The red wax seal bearing the unmistakable W of my grandmother's personal stamp remained unbroken. Your Honor, Dana said, her voice holding no triumph, only a deep procedural gravity. We have concluded our presentation of the facts. We are now prepared, as part of our closing argument, to present the final testimony, that of Margaret Whiteham herself. She held the envelope up for the court to see. This document was entrusted to Alan Mercer with the explicit written instruction that it be delivered sealed to legal counsel in the event, and only in the event, of a challenge to her will. She laid it on her desk with a small silver letter opener. She slid the blade beneath the wax. The sound of the seal breaking, a tiny, crisp tear, was the loudest thing I had ever heard. She reached inside and withdrew 3 pages. They were not flimsy paper. They were heavy vellum, a pale, warm ivory, slightly yellowed at the margins, as if they had absorbed the sunlight from the study window. Dana walked to the projector. She laid the first page down. The monitor flickered, and then my grandmother's handwriting filled the screen. It was not the shaky, uncertain script of an old woman. It was her, the strong, precise, slightly slanted cursive I knew from 30 years of birthday cards, margin notes on my homework, and the recipe cards in the kitchen. The room was utterly still. I could hear Leia's breathing quick and shallow. Dana began to read, and as she read, her own voice seemed to recede, and it was my grandmother, in her full professorial authority, who was speaking. To the court, and to any other party who presumes to know my mind, she began, "My name is Margaret Whiteham. I am 82 years old. I am writing this letter on October the 5th, approximately 6 months before I expect this letter to be needed. I am writing it in my study, in sound mind and body, with no duress. My physician, Dr. Reeve, Samuel Reeve, saw me this morning and can attest to my lucidity. My financial advisor, Alan Mercer, is present as a witness, and he can attest to my full and complete understanding of my assets. I am not a fool. I know my daughter, Leia, and I know her husband, Connor. I know that upon my death, they will appear draped in a performance of manufactured grief to claim a right they forfeited 31 years ago. I am writing this letter to be my final personal testimony. I am writing this to be the last voice you hear. My hand resting on the briefcase in my lap found the zipper. My finger slipped inside, gripping the soft, folded cotton of her apron. My last will and testament, Dana continued, her voice clear and measured, is not a mistake. It is not the product of confusion, or isolation, or undue influence. It is the product of 31 years of evidence. It is the result of a life lived and a life observed. I leave my entire estate, my house, my savings, my books, my memory to my granddaughter, Dr. Aurora Bennett. I do this not because of blood. The bond of blood, I have learned, is thin. It is an accident of biology. I do this because of presence. Presence is a choice. Presence is an action. Presence is loyalty. Aurora did not have to stay. She stayed. I closed my eyes. The 2 words hit me with the force of a physical blow. She stayed. The summary of my entire existence, the validation for every Sunday I had driven through the snow. Let the record be clear, Dana read, turning to the 2nd page. My daughter, Leia Hayes, and her husband Connor have not been forgotten. They have not been cruelly disinherited. They have, in fact, been paid. For 20 years, I have sent them a monthly stipend of $1,250. This totals approximately $300,000. I did not send this money out of love. I sent it as an act of contractual charity. I sent it so that Brooke, the daughter they chose to keep, would not suffer for her parents' failings. And I sent it so that no one in a room, just like this one, could ever claim that I left them with nothing. They took the money for 20 years. They took the money. And in those 20 years, they did not visit me. They did not call on my birthday. They did not come for Christmas. They provided no comfort, no company, and no care. They exchanged their relationship with me for $300,000. It was a transaction, and it is complete. Victor Lang sat, his face the color of ash. He was not just defeated, he was obsolete. His client had been outmaneuvered legally and intellectually by a woman who was no longer even alive. Aurora Bennett, Dana read, her voice softening for the first time, asked for nothing, and she gave me everything. She gave me her weekends. She gave me her holidays. She held my hand when Harold died. She sat with me through the storms. She brought this house to life. She is not the child of my blood. She is the child of my heart. She is the daughter of my choice. And so, to the final, inevitable claim of isolation, to the lie that this one devoted woman somehow held me prisoner, Dana paused, letting the silence stretch before reading the final, devastating paragraph. If anyone in this room dares to suggest that Aurora isolated me, please ask them to describe my Sunday dinner table. Ask them to describe the smell of carrot cake in my kitchen. Ask them if they can name a single black and white film we argued over. Ask them if they were ever there. My mind is my own. My will is my own. This is my choice. This is my final word. Dana turned the last page. The signature was bold and clear, Margaret Whiteham. Beneath it, the signatures of Dr. Reeve and Alan Mercer, dated and notarized. The document was a fortress. Legally, it was untouchable. Dana Morales looked at Judge Lane. The defense rests, Your Honor. The silence in the courtroom was no longer a vacuum. It was a cathedral. It was the sound of a life fully and brilliantly lived and perfectly, precisely defended. The sound of the ventilation system, usually a low hum, seemed to have stopped. I heard the shuffle of the court stenographer's paper, and it sounded like a gavel falling. Then a sound, a sharp, ugly intake of breath. Leah Hayes began to cry. But it was not the soft, tragic weeping she had performed earlier. It was a dry, gasping, furious sob. It was the sound of a plan shattering. It was the raw, unfiltered rage of a gambler who had just lost everything on the final card. Her head was in her hands. But her eyes, red and furious, darted up. They locked on Victor Lang. They were not eyes of grief. They were eyes of calculation. They were the eyes of a person already trying to figure out who to sue next. I felt nothing. No triumph, no anger, no joy, just peace. My hand inside my briefcase was clenched around the old, faded apron. I could feel the worn texture of the fabric, the faint stiffness of an old flour stain, and as I held it, the cold, sterile smell of the courtroom, the floor wax, the old wood, the faint metallic tang of fear, it all dissolved. I was in the kitchen on Sycamore Avenue. It was 4 p.m. on a Sunday. The windows were steamed. The scent of cinnamon, nutmeg, and warm cream cheese frosting was so thick I could taste it. I could hear the timer ticking on the stove. I could feel the warmth of the oven. I was safe. I had been seen. The only person who mattered had seen me. The case was over. The money, the house, the lawsuit, it was all just noise. She stayed at the bench. Judge Harper Lane, the woman my grandmother had called relentlessly logical, took off her glasses. She polished them slowly. She was not just a judge in that moment. She was a student, acknowledging the master. She put her glasses back on. She looked at Margaret's letter, still projected on the screen. She looked at the plaintiffs, her expression unreadable. This court has been asked to invalidate the last will and testament of Margaret Whiteham, she began, her voice filling the room, sharp and clear. The plaintiffs, Leah and Connor Hayes, have petitioned on the grounds of diminished capacity and undue influence. Their entire case rested on this premise, that Margaret Whiteham was confused, isolated, and coerced. She paused, looking directly at Victor Lang. To support this claim, the plaintiffs offered the testimony of Dr. Nolan Pierce. This court finds Dr. Pierce's testimony to be not just unreliable, but actively deceptive. Her diagnosis was formed over 2 visits conducted under false pretenses, she continued, her voice a rhythmic catalogue of our evidence. He failed to consult with the patient's doctor of 32 years, Dr. Samuel Reeve. He had a direct, disqualifying financial conflict of interest with the plaintiff's cousin, Dr. Wyatt Sloan. An Exhibit M established he had a further financial entanglement with the plaintiff, Connor Hayes, who served as the registered agent for his clinic. This court does not consider Dr. Pierce an expert. It considers him a co-conspirator. His testimony is struck. Victor Lang looked like he had been physically hit. We are left, then, Judge Lane said, with the opposing evidence. And the opposing evidence is not a story. It is a mountain. It is 30 years of personal journals, she said, nodding to the boxes, detailing in the deceased's own lucid hand, a consistent pattern of abandonment by the plaintiffs. It is the phone logs of Harold Whiteham, she went on, showing hundreds of unanswered calls, pleas for presence at every one of Dr. Bennett's life milestones. It is the photographs, a life captured in pictures with the plaintiffs absent from every frame. It is the long-term, meticulous medical records of Dr. Reeve, confirming without exception that Margaret Whiteham was in full command of her faculties. It is the video of her lecturing brilliantly on this very subject 6 months before her death. And finally, she said, her voice dropping, it is Margaret Whiteham's own words. A letter prepared with stunning foresight, which not only confirms her intent, but obliterates the plaintiff's entire motive. She turned her gaze on Leah and Connor. It was the first time I had seen her look at them with open contempt. The plaintiffs did not come to this court seeking a natural order or a familial bond. The motive was established, beyond any reasonable doubt, to be financial. This was not an attempt at reconciliation. It was a cash grab. It was an attempt to collect on an investment they never made. The evidence is clear. The 50-50 voicemail, left before the will was even read. The threatening text messages. The systematic collection of $300,000, which Mrs. Whiteham herself, in her letter, defined as a transaction she considered complete. She gathered her papers into a neat stack. Therefore, this court finds as follows. The room held its breath. The petition filed by Leah and Connor Hayes is dismissed with prejudice. The last will and testament of Margaret Whiteham is affirmed as valid, sound, and the uncoerced, transparent intent of the testator. I let out a breath I had been holding for my entire life, but Judge Lane was not finished. Furthermore, this court finds that this petition was filed frivolously, maliciously, and with the intent to defraud. It was an act of profound bad faith. Therefore, the plaintiffs, Leah and Connor Hayes, are hereby ordered to pay the entirety of the defendant's court costs and all associated legal fees. A strangled sound came from Leah. All of it. Dana's fees, the cost of the depositions, all of it. They had gambled, and they had lost not just the inheritance, but their own money. Judge Lane fixed them with one last, searing look. She leaned forward. This court is often asked to weigh the rights of family, but family is not a one-way street. Family is not a word you get to invoke once every 30 years, when there is money on the table. This court looks at evidence. It does not look at bloodlines, especially when those bloodlines have been absent for 3 decades. She stood. We are adjourned. The gavel cracked, a sound as final as a door locking for a full 10 seconds. No one moved. It was over. Then, the sound of defeat. Victor Lang, his face pale and slick with sweat, began shoving his papers into his briefcase. He did not look at his clients. He just wanted to get out. Leah and Connor sat frozen. I looked at them. I, the robber, the thief. They did not look back. Their eyes were fixed on the empty judge's bench. Their faces a mottled red mask of pure, undiluted fury. In the back row, I saw a blur of motion. Brooke Hayes. She stood, her whole body shaking, her face streaked with tears. She didn't look at her parents. She didn't look at me. She just turned and ran from the courtroom, her footsteps echoing in the hall. I turned to Dana. She was neatly closing her own file. I felt quiet. There was no surge of victory. There was no rage. There was no desire to walk over and say, "I told you so." The anger that had fueled me, the cold fire, it was just gone. It had burned itself out. All I felt was a profound, bone-deep relief, a release. A promise I had made to a granite headstone had been kept. I protected your choice, Grandma. Her voice was heard. The law she had taught, the logic she had revered, had been her shield. The walk out of the courthouse was a blur. The hallway felt too bright. We pushed through the heavy doors and onto the wide granite steps. The air was cool. The heavy grey clouds from the morning still hanging in the sky. Dana stood beside me, buttoning her jacket. She too looked tired but satisfied, the surgeon, her work complete. "They won't appeal," she said, her voice flat. "They can't." She didn't just order them to pay your fees, she ordered them to pay with prejudice. She destroyed their standing. "It's over," I said. It wasn't a question. "It's over." We stood there for a moment, watching the traffic. Dana turned to me, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "That Sunday dinner table," she said, her voice quiet, "the one from her letter. Will it be full this week, Dr. Bennett?" I looked at her, and the tightness in my chest, the knot I had carried since that first email, finally completely unraveled. A real smile spread across my face. "Yes, Dana," I said. "It will be." I didn't drive to my apartment. I drove to Sycamore Avenue. I used my key. The lock, which had always been a little stiff, turned smoothly. I pushed the door open. The house was silent, but it was not the empty, grieving silence of the past few weeks. It was the quiet, expectant silence of a home. It smelled of old books, lemon oil, and the faint, sweet ghost of roses. It smelled of her. I walked through the foyer, past her study. I didn't stop. I walked directly to the kitchen. The afternoon sun, finally breaking through the clouds, streamed through the window over the sink, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I unzipped my briefcase. I took out the folded blue-flowered cotton apron. I held it, the fabric soft and familiar in my hands. I ran my thumb over the stiff patch of old cinnamon stain. I laid it on the worn wooden kitchen table. It was not a trophy. It was a transfer of guardianship. In that exact, perfect moment, the doorbell rang. I didn't need to look. I knew who it was, Teresa, Dr. Reeve and his wife, my two friends from the hospital, the ones who had sat in the back row, my family, the ones I had chosen. I smiled, turning to the door. Sunday dinner was about to begin. The story has concluded.